The first sound wasn't the slap. It was the gasp, the sharp, involuntary intake of breath that rippled through the emergency department like a wave tearing through glass. The second sound was a tray skittering across the floor, metallic instruments spinning wide as coins. The third sound was the clock. It kept ticking like nothing unforgivable had happened. A white male physician, starched coat and starched ego, had just struck a black nurse in front of patients, interns, and a half-dozen phones raised at shoulder height. But the clock kept time, like time could hold this kind of heat without melting. Maya didn't stumble. She didn't cry. She didn't answer the physician's barked command to know her place. She pressed her palm flat against the cart to steady it, and she looked at the man who'd made a choice he could never unchoose. She had warned him, gently, that the patient's lab markers didn't match the plan he'd ordered. She had done what a professional is required to do, what a lifesaver does by reflex. His answer to her expertise was a hand that traveled faster than his judgment. Around them the ER slowed to a stage, monitors beeping, fluorescent lights buzzing, live streams quietly multiplying. You could almost taste the electricity of it. Security, he snapped, as if the word were a spell, as if summoning uniforms would rewind the last 10 seconds. Remove her. No one moved. Not the security guard with his thumb on a radio. Not the intern who kept blinking like blinking might erase the scene. Not the elderly visitor whose glove creaked as he clenched a tissue. The closest movement came from a teenage volunteer who slid a box of scattered syringes out of a footpath with her shoe. Then the charge nurse whispered, "Maya," like a prayer you say too late. Maya lifted her chin, the welt on her cheek bright as a warning flare. "And because the truth makes some people reckless," she said, calm and clear. "Are you sure you know who you just put your hands on?" He scoffed. Pride always scoffs before it falls. He adjusted his tie, straightened his name badge, arranged his outrage like a shield. "I know exactly who you are," he said, voice loaded with the lazy certainty of someone who loves hierarchies more than people. "You're an employee who forgot the chain of command." "The chain of command is for emergencies," Maya answered. Eyes on him. Eyes on the patients. Eyes on the 15 different recordings happening at once. This is about respect. And safety. And consequences. The elevator at the end of the corridor chimed. An administrator stepped out fast, hair a little wrong, blazer half-buttoned, breath coming quick. Her tablet lit her face with a cold glow. She took in the scene, the handprint, the ring of onlookers, the way the physician's anger had frayed into something like fear. When she spoke, she didn't ask questions, she asked names. Who was the nurse? Who was the physician? Who witnessed what? Her eyes hit the clock. 9 o'clock. A board meeting upstairs had started 2 minutes ago. Her voice softened when she saw the streak of red across Maya's cheek, then went hard again when she saw 3 separate live streams running. He pointed. She was insubordinate. She challenged a physician in front of patients. He said the word physician like other people say royalty. Then he made his second, irreversible mistake. He called Maya a girl. Not an accident. A choice. Silence poured over the room. The word hit every wall and bounced back meaner. An older woman in a wheelchair shook her head slowly, like she'd been waiting her whole life to see someone stand up to that tone. A resident swallowed hard and put his phone down, as if his hands were suddenly too heavy to hold anything else. Security, the physician said again, but softer now, because the shape of the moment was changing and he could feel it. Escort her out. The administrator's tablet vibrated. Her eyes widened at the message that flashed across the screen. Director needs confirmation. Is Maya safe? The administrator looked at Maya with a new kind of attention. Maya Thompson, is it? She asked. Maya held up her badge. The plastic was cracked along one edge from the blow. The name was plain. The employee number was not. That number said she belonged to a family the hospital did not want to disappoint. Behind her badge there was a second identification card, clean, clinical, inarguable, linking her to an office most people would never enter uninvited. The physician's mouth opened, then closed. You could see it dawn. This was not the story he thought he was in. Maya's phone buzzed, and she answered it on speaker. A voice came through, steady, low, and unmistakably in charge. Maya, where are you? Downstairs, she said. With a situation. Bring your witnesses, the voice replied. Now. The administrator's composure cracked for the length of a blink. The security guard shifted his weight off the radio. A volunteer stopped breathing. The ER, suddenly, was the lobby of a courthouse, and everyone knew it. The physician reached for his certainty again, but it had shrunk. "This is theater," he said, the words thinner than he meant. "She's trying to embarrass me." Maya didn't raise her voice. She didn't have to. The cameras did that for her. "No," she said. "You did that yourself." The elevator doors opened like a curtain rising. Maya stepped inside with a nursing student who still had her camera angled downward out of respect. As the doors closed, someone in the waiting area began to clap. One pair of hands, then two, then a handful more. Not celebration. Recognition. The clap you hear when someone refuses to disappear. Upstairs, the mahogany table gleamed with the kind of polish you can't buy in stores. Around it sat people who signed paychecks and policies, people who looked most comfortable where carpet dampened the sound of footsteps. The director at the head of the table didn't look comfortable at all. He looked like a father who had run out of patience for other people's children. He stood when Maya entered, 1,000 emotions passing through his eyes before he pushed them all down and asked the only question that mattered. "Are you hurt?" "I'm okay," she said. "But we are not." The nursing student played the video. You could hear the words so clearly they hurt. And then there was that snap. Fast, cheap, violent. A crack that might have been a door slamming shut on someone's career. The room winced. Someone whispered an expletive they tried to swallow too late. No one defended it. No one could. Maya laid evidence on the table the way a paramedic lays instruments. In a line, ready for use. Dates. Emails. Texts. Evaluations doctored to punish dissent. A long record of short tempers. Beneath every incident was the same equation. Power plus contempt equals danger. She didn't pretend this was about one man and one slap. She said it plain. "We built a staircase that lets people kick downward. And then we act surprised when they do." The board asked the questions boards ask. What would change cost? What would inaction cost more? What would compliance look like? What would failure do to the hospital's reputation? And then the question with a hook inside it. What do you recommend? Maya didn't pitch a revenge story. She offered a repair plan. Transparency that couldn't be gamed. Training that didn't insult people's intelligence. Real consequences no one could lawyer away. A model that treated dignity as a safety device, not a slogan. "We protect patients by protecting the people who care for them," she said. It wasn't a slogan either. It was a map. Downstairs, the ER buzzed like a hive too long ignored. Upstairs, the table of decision-makers did something rare, they decided. Suspension pending investigation. Immediate separation if the evidence held, and the evidence was sitting on the table breathing. A press conference in the morning because truth told late turns into rumor. A rollout of new systems because culture is what you do, not what you frame on a wall. They sent for the physician. He came in pale, smaller than his lab coat, smaller than the room. He tried for indignant and landed on afraid. "Don't do this," he said, voice cracking on the last word. "You'll ruin me." Maya held his eyes. "No," she said softly, not unkindly. "You did that yourself." When he left, flanked by security who suddenly looked like gravity, Maya closed her eyes for 3 long seconds. A nurse who keeps her hands steady when blood is on the floor finally let them shake. Her father reached across the polished wood and didn't touch her cheek, didn't risk that it might break the dam. He only said, "I am proud of you," as if pride could be a bandage. She nodded once. She had work to do. By midnight, the ER had new rules taped up like emergency exit maps. The hospital's internal messaging lit the staff phones with a promise that was also a warning. Respect is checked in, arrogance is out of network. By 2 a.m., the first messages of support slid into Maya's inbox from nurses she had never met. Voices like hers, steady, tired, unwilling to be invisible any longer. By dawn, news vans idled at the curb, engines murmuring. And at 8, the microphones were placed and the podium was set, and the hospital faced the public not with excuses, but with a plan. The first sentence of the press statement was short enough to remember. "We failed a nurse last night." The second sentence explained how they intended to make sure it never happened again. Maya walked away from the podium and into a corridor that smelled faintly of coffee and bleach and hope. The hall was lined with people who work with their hands and hearts. They didn't cheer. They didn't need to. They just stood a little taller and let her pass, because sometimes respect is quiet. And somewhere in the city, in an apartment were the blinds. were still drawn, and the mirror still didn't feel safe. The physician stared at his phone as it filled with notifications. He had been right about one thing. The hospital did not tolerate insubordination. He just never imagined the rule would apply to him. The hospital had two faces, the fluorescent one where everyone could see, and the walnut-paneled one where decisions got dressed before meeting the world. That morning, both faces flushed with the same emotion. Shame curdled into resolve. Overnight, the video had traveled faster than the truth usually does. By breakfast, anchors were mouthing the words everyone already knew. A nurse was slapped for speaking up, and the wrong man was the one who thought he had power. Maya didn't rehearse her address to the board. She didn't need to. She had spent 5 years collecting proof that respect isn't a soft virtue. It's a hard requirement. When she spread her files across the table, they didn't look like paperwork. They looked like a blueprint for a building that wouldn't collapse when someone leaned on it. Her father, Director Thompson in this room, Dad only in the spaces in between, didn't run interference. He asked questions like any other leader whose name would sit under the headline if they failed again. How fast can we do this? How do we measure whether it's working? How do we make sure this is culture, not a campaign? Maya's answers didn't promise miracles. They promised mechanisms. Mandatory reporting with guaranteed response times. A training curriculum designed by people who study harm, not people who design glossy brochures. Accountability structures that connected behavior to pay, promotion, and privilege. It sounded less like a diversity seminar and more like a safety checklist. That was the point. The board voted unanimously. It's easy to be brave when a camera is on you. It's harder when the camera turns off and the costs arrive. But they were done bargaining with denial. The physician was formally separated. No soft landings, no press releases that called it retirement. No back door to a similar job across town. The hospital announced an independent review. They invited a civil rights group to sit in meetings that used to happen behind closed doors. They promised to publish numbers, even if the numbers were ugly. The press conference happened in a room that had held graduations and baby fairs and late-season flu updates. Today it held something rarer, institutional humility. The spokesperson said it out loud. No passive voice, no fog. A physician hit a nurse. He demeaned her. Our staff and our patients deserve better. We accept responsibility. Here's what we're doing about it. They listed steps. Not adjectives, steps. Cameras clicked. Not everyone believed them. Belief comes last. In the corridors, the reaction was louder because it was older. Some workers cried. A quick, cathartic release into the crook of a sleeve. Some looked skeptical, like someone who has seen apologies dry up faster than a puddle under summer sun. Many looked at Maya the way you look at a lighthouse, grateful it exists, aware that storms will keep coming anyway. That afternoon, Maya met with a half-circle of nurses from every unit. They swapped stories the way soldiers compare scars. The details were different, the math was the same. Somebody with status used it like a weapon, somebody without it carried the bruise. An ICU nurse confessed she had stopped reporting microaggressions because the paperwork always outlasted the empathy. A new grad admitted she practiced how to speak to certain attendings in the mirror to make herself smaller. A charge nurse described telling her team to avoid that one hallway because cameras were scarce there and tempers were not. Maya wrote words on a whiteboard and then crossed half of them out because words were not the solution, structures were. When the union rep came in, he came in hot. He waved a packet of demands nobody could implement in a week. Maya let the steam blow itself out, made tea she didn't drink, then slid a draft agreement across the table. "Help me edit this into something we can hold," she said. He read it, blinked twice, and said, "Okay, this is different." They hammered out a pact nobody loved, but everyone could live with. The pact had teeth. It named behavior. It set clocks that started the moment a complaint was filed. It tied pay to respect the way pay gets tied to procedures. Do it right, and you rise. Harm people, and you won't just sit in a workshop, you'll sit at home. They agreed to publish quarterly numbers like sports stats. Incidents reported, investigations completed, consequences delivered, repairs made. The numbers would make the hospital look worse before they made it look better. That was honest. In the evening, Maya stood in an auditorium full of white coats and blue scrubs and explained what accountability would feel like. Not a witch hunt, she said. A mirror. A mirror you can't move or cover. She acknowledged fear. She promised fairness. She told them something everyone needed to hear, even if it stung. Brilliance is not a permit to be cruel. On her way out, an old surgeon stopped her with a hand not quite on her shoulder. "I've been here since before your father," he said. "I thought I had seen every kind of reform. This one, if you pull it off, you'll change more than a hospital." She smiled without softening. She said. "If we pull it off." The physician who had made the slap and the slur sat in a quiet apartment watching himself loop in a dozen tiny rectangles. He drafted statements that tried to make a context big enough to contain a blow. He called men who used to return calls fast. Their advice coagulated into something unhelpful. Lie low. Don't inflame it. People forget. He watched the videos again and understood the part he had underestimated most, the calm on Maya's face. That calm was not indifference. It was preparation. That night, the hospital's new reporting app pinged 36 times. Old incidents were entered fresh. New incidents were warned away by the knowledge they might be recorded and reviewed. The security office felt different, less like a bunker, more like a switchboard connecting pleas to action. Supervisors learned to answer calls with, "I'm here," instead of, "What do you want me to do?" It was not a revolution. It was more radical than that. It was a system working the way it claims to. And somewhere around midnight, when the phones quieted and the halls echoed, Maya sat at her desk and wrote a letter to her younger self. 21. First day, badge too shiny, hopes too heavy. You will be underestimated, she wrote. Carry proof. You will be told to be grateful. Carry standards. You will be told you are overreacting. Carry the faces of patients who depended on your voice. You will be told respect is earned. Remember, it is given, or it isn't respect. She didn't send it anywhere. She folded it once and slid it into a drawer beside her ID. Then she went back to work. The morning after the press conference, the hospital lobby felt like a city square. Reporters clustered near a water wall that had never looked so performative. Patients arrived with questions their doctors weren't used to answering. Is this a safe place for my daughter? Are you the hospital that hit the nurse? Volunteers handed out visitor passes with hands that trembled a little less than yesterday. Maya didn't lean on optics. She leaned on operations. Schedule changes ensured no single unit could be dominated by the same old personalities. De-escalation leads, nurses and techs with gifts for reading rooms, were given titles and authority instead of quiet praise and burnout. A hotline went live and, almost immediately, saved a phlebotomist from a supervisor who thought yelling was a technique. Instant karma wasn't a magical force. It was a well-staffed call center with decision rights. The hospital launched mandatory bystander training. The first session opened with a question. Where did your eyes go when the slap landed? The answers were uncomfortable and holy. People told the truth. To the floor. To my hands. To the security guard, and then away because I didn't want him to think I was telling him what to do. They practiced 3 sentences that would become famous in town. I saw that. That's not okay. I'm calling this in. It wasn't poetry. It was rescue. When reporters asked whether the hospital feared lawsuits, Maya didn't flinch. We fear harm to people, she said. Lawsuits are what happen when you fear the wrong thing for too long. When someone tried the old pivot, isn't this political? She didn't let the ball roll away. Safety is not partisan. Dignity is not partisan. Those are the basics of care. The physician's disciplinary hearing came quickly because the world was watching. He arrived with an attorney who looked like he charged by the minute and spoke by the hour. The panel didn't act like a court. It acted like a conscience. They asked about the culture that raised his hand before it raised his doubt. He started to say, I was provoked, and then the video played and the word withered. He said, I've saved lives, and the panel said, so has she. He said, I'm under pressure, and a resident in the back of the room murmured, we all are, and half the room nodded. The panel recommended revocation of privileges and referred the matter to the licensing authority. Instant Karma has paperwork. In the cafeteria, a quiet revolt happened at lunch tables. People stopped laughing at jokes that weren't jokes. People declined to sit near colleagues who made tension a seasoning. A clerk who'd kept a list in her phone of the times she'd been called sweetheart showed it to her manager, who showed it to HR, who occurred like a storm, with apology, with promises that sounded like deadlines. It was messy. It was good. A week later, Maya held a listening session for patients and families. They told her what it feels like to watch someone in scrubs get belittled, and wonder if the next thing that goes missing will be attention to your chart. They told her that hospitals say team, but feel like cast. They told her that their kids notice everything, which meant the smallest slur stuck like gum on a shoe. Maya wrote down phrases and later turned them into posters that didn't congratulate the hospital for trying. They reminded people what they're for. Your title isn't your tone. Skill without kindness is a risk. We're not perfect, we're accountable. A local pastor asked Maya to speak on Sunday. She said yes and didn't bring notes. She told a sanctuary full of people what any sanctuary ought to hear. If a hospital can change the way it treats its lowest paid worker, a city can change the way it treats anyone. The amens rose from people who had never stepped into an OR. Back at the hospital, an intern who had filmed the incident wrestled with guilt because he had filmed more than he had acted. Maya found him in a stairwell where the acoustics make you sound braver than you feel. She told him something he would carry into every code blue and every conference room. You cannot undo what you didn't do yesterday. You can do something today. Start there. By the end of the month, numbers began to shift. Not the glossy numbers first. The honest ones. Reports went up because silence went down. Turnover leveled because dignity arrived. Patient complaints dipped because staff had bandwidth no one had known they'd stolen from themselves by tolerating contempt. The hospital's social accounts turned off comments for a week, then turned them back on not because the storms had ended, but because the shelter had been rebuilt. And the physician? He discovered there is no private version of a public act. He apologized. It read like a document reviewed by 7 people. He recorded a video. It looked like a man trying to earn back what he had forfeited. He asked to meet with Maya. She said yes, because dignity cuts both ways. They sat across from each other in a windowed room with 2 glasses of water that no one touched. I am sorry, he said. He said it without qualifiers, which is to say he finally said it. I believe the myth that being needed made me untouchable. Maya's answer was merciful without being soft. Being needed should have made you kinder. He asked if there was a path back. She told him there is always a path, but some roads lead to different doors than you had planned. If you truly want to repair, you'll spend your skill in places that don't put you back in charge of people you've harmed, she said. And you'll spend your reputation protecting the colleagues you used to assume were beneath you. He nodded, and for the first time since the clock ticked that night, he looked like someone who might do more good than damage. Redemption is not guaranteed. It is offered. A reform that lives in memos dies in meetings. Maya moved it into rooms. She walked or where voices rise under masks. She walked the night shift where the air hums with fatigue and bravery. She sat in a break room where someone had taped up a comic that wasn't funny anymore and took it down herself, then explained why jokes that punch down punch holes in safety. She met with the legal team and taught them a new word they pretended they already knew: restorative. Not a substitute for consequences, a supplement. They built a process for apologies that actually healed, for closures that didn't simply close cases. It required 3 things that systems fear: time, truth, and the willingness to be changed by both. When a senior tech made a nurse cry and then sent a 2-sentence email that said, "Sorry if you were offended," Maya sent it back like a bounced check. "Try again," she wrote. "Say what you did. Say who it hurt. Say how you'll prevent it." The second apology wasn't perfect. It was better. Better is a direction. The licensing authority scheduled a hearing for the physician. The hospital did not lobby for leniency and did not bay for blood. It submitted its record and its reforms. The message was simple. We cannot control a man's contrition. We can control our culture. The authority suspended his license and set conditions for return that looked more like a pilgrimage than a probation. He accepted. Privilege is heavy when you have to lift it yourself. Maya invited residents to a seminar called Power Literacy. At first they were wary, the way people are when they sense a trap. Then she told them the truth they had been craving. You have power now. No one taught you how to hold it. She told them to notice whose ideas get repeated without credit and to name the source out loud in rooms where credit becomes career. She taught techniques for disagreeing down the chain without humiliating up the chain. She modeled how to ask a nurse, "What am I missing?" and mean it. She told them a secret. The staff will move mountains for you if you deserve them. A county reporter who expected spin got access instead. Maya walked her through dashboards that showed messy progress. Some lines went the wrong way before they bent. The reporter wrote a piece that didn't make anyone a hero or a villain. It made the case for doing work in daylight. The comments were kind, which in news is a minor miracle. One afternoon, a mother came to the hospital with a toddler whose lungs were staging a revolt. The nurse who triaged them wore a small camera by choice. The mother relaxed visibly when she saw the lens. "It makes me feel safe," she said, and then added, shy and fierce at once. "And it makes you feel safe too, right?" The nurse nodded. Safety begets safety. The old surgeon stopped Maya again, this time in a hallway where the art was too abstract to be judged. "When I started," he said, "we taught by terror. We thought fear was focus. I am sorry for the years I contributed to that." It sounded like absolution and request. Maya didn't erase him with a lecture. "Thank you," she said. "Help me teach something better." He did. He started opening difficult conversations with his own mistake of the month, the teaches that require truth. His residents grew faster. He slept better. Late one night, a janitor, Mr. Ellis, the kind of man a hospital can't run without and too often forgets to see, slid a small envelope under Maya's door. Inside was a photo of a bulletin board in a staff corridor. On it, under the heading Moments of Respect, someone had pinned a printed comment from a patient. "My nurse looked me in the eye and called me by my name before she checked the chart. It was the first time I felt like a person here." Mr. Ellis had scrawled in neat block letters, "Keep going." She taped the photo to the corner of her monitor. "Some metrics you measure. Some you carry. A hospital is a mirror. People see in it what they see in themselves." When the mirror cleaned up, the city noticed. Employers asked for copies of the bystander scripts. A school district borrowed the apology template. A police precinct requested the training deck on tone, because a voice can de-escalate or detonate. Maya stood on a stage at a regional conference where leaders wear lanyards and hope. She told them what no keynote usually admits. "Our first month was rough. Old habits are stubborn. We lost 2 good clinicians who didn't want to change." She paused. "We also kept 5 who were going to leave because nothing ever did." You could feel the math hit home. Retention is a language CFOs speak. The hospital became a teaching site for culture, the way it had always been a teaching site for medicine. Visitors watched nurses lead huddles where they used to stand silently behind clipboards. They watched residents practice introducing themselves to housekeepers by name because a sterile field is protected by everyone who touches a room. They watched a senior administrator sit in a chair across from a dietary worker and ask, "What would make this place safer for you?" The answer was small, more radios in the tunnels where deliveries happen. The impact was not. A week later, the radios were there. A month later, someone published the story. The comment section said things like, "This is how you build trust. You start at the lowest hallway." The physician, meanwhile, did something that surprised even him. He volunteered at a clinic that served people whose names rarely crossed his lips before. Gig workers, seniors on fixed incomes, new arrivals learning the language of their bodies in a new language. He checked blood pressure with gentleness. He learned to say, "What do you think is happening?" without condescension. He wrote a letter to the hospital board that did not ask for reinstatement. It asked how he might contribute without forcing anyone to be near his old self. They gave him a spot teaching documentation ethics to new interns with a slide that read, "Write as if the person you're writing about is reading over your shoulder." Because they are. He taught the session carefully, eyes on the door, hands open. Halfway through, he said, 2 months ago I thought accountability was a PR word. I was wrong." He looked at the interns. "You don't have to learn this the way I did." Maya visited a nursing school class and sat in the last row instead of the front. She listened to stories that sounded like hers, and when she spoke she did not tell them to be strong. She told them to be strategic. Document. Find allies. Know the policy numbers the way you know the medication doses. Confidence is good. Proof is better. A student raised her hand and asked, "What if my director isn't your dad?" The room went very still. Maya smiled with understanding that reached every corner. "My father didn't give me power," she said. "He made room for the power I built. If no one makes room for you, bring a chair. And if they ask who you think you are, answer with your work." That night, the hospital lobby filled with lights that weren't TV cameras. It was a vigil for the harmed, for the healers, for the idea that institutions can become better than the worst thing that happened inside them. People read names of colleagues who had left the profession because cruelty is a kind of hazard. People spoke the names of teachers who had kept them alive with a look that said, "I see you." Maya lit a candle and didn't make a speech. Some moments don't want a microphone. They want quiet and heat and the knowledge that someone else is holding the flame beside you. 6 months later, statistics lined up like soldiers in a parade. Incidents down. Response times up. Patient satisfaction higher than the cafeteria's daily coffee sales. The hospital published a report that read less like a victory lap and more like a field guide. What worked, what didn't, what we still owe. They mailed it to facilities that had sent condolences and to facilities that had sent skepticism. They mailed it to themselves. Maya went to the state capitol and sat under a seal that made everyone speak softly. Lawmakers asked whether the model could scale. She answered like a nurse reads a monitor. Precisely. Yes, with funding for training that isn't one and done. Yes, with protections for reporters that include temp workers. Yes, with requirements that numbers be public so change isn't just seasonal. She named costs, and then named savings in lives and lawsuits, and the one metric that never shows up on a balance sheet. People who stayed because hope finally had a badge. After her testimony, she walked past a row of portraits. Men and a few women who had written rules that govern lives they would never live. She thought about all the invisible hands that had written theirs. Housekeepers, transporters, cafeteria workers, volunteers with visitor stickers that peeled at the corners. She thought about the slap and the moment after, the one where time didn't stop, but everything else did. She allowed herself exactly 3 seconds to feel the ache that had started it all, then moved on, because healing doesn't wait for permission. Back at the hospital, the ER hummed with familiar chaos. A child cried softly while a nurse blew bubbles. A resident murmured, "You were right," to a tech who had gently redirected him. A janitor's cart rolled past like a ship of small miracles, gloves, wipes, an extra charger that would save a dying phone. The old surgeon told a joke that punched up and landed clean. The charge nurse pointed to a poster that read, "We don't tolerate disrespect here, not because we're sensitive, but because we're serious." The physician came by to drop off a stack of printed handouts for the interns. He didn't linger. He didn't look for credit in faces. He had learned the quiet walk of someone serving a sentence he chose because it pointed toward restoration. As he left, he passed Maya in the hall. He stopped, not blocking, but pausing. "I don't expect forgiveness," he said. "I do expect to keep doing the work." She nodded once. "Good," she said. "The world needs that more than it needs your guilt." Near the end of her shift, Maya visited the patient whose lab markers had started the whole trajectory months ago. He was reading a paperback with a bent corner. He smiled when he saw her. "You're the one who tells people the truth nicely," he said. She laughed. "I try." He held up his book. "I like stories where the good folks win." She glanced around the room, clean, bright, orderly, and said, "Me too." As she walked back through the lobby, the water wall whispered its rehearsal of calm. She thought of the sentence that had become a vow, printed in small letters at the bottom of every staff ID. "Respect is a safety device." She touched the plastic, felt the edge of the crack that had never been buffed out of her badge because some reminders should stay visible. Then she stepped into the evening, the city air full of sirens and laughter and the ordinary music of a place where people try, fail, hurt, heal, and do better tomorrow. If you'd asked her the day before the slap what she wanted, she would have said, "To do my job well." If you asked her now, she'd say the same sentence and mean something larger. Because doing her job well meant changing the job for everyone who would ever wear blue scrubs, white coats, or a name tag that made strangers trust them. It meant telling the story right, not as revenge, but as repair, not as humiliation, but as humility, not as a scandal, but as a standard. Justice had come quickly because preparation made it ready. Karma didn't float in on a cloud. It walked in through the employee entrance with a clipboard and a plan. And the man who slapped a nurse in front of everyone learned the lesson the hard way. You never know when the person you're trying to put in their place has already built a better place for everyone. Maya took the long way to the parking garage, past the windows where night shift nurses wave to families walking their dogs, past the bench where Mr. Ellis sometimes sits to stretch his back, past the sign where the hospital's motto used to be a platitude and has become a promise. She paused to look at it, not for inspiration, but for inventory. Then she smiled, a small, earned thing, and went home to rest the hands that hold the world together when it threatens to fall apart.